Once a famous poet was inspired by the land to write, "The earth and the sky and the water, remade like a casket of gold." But our land is more, far more than an inspiration for poets and singers of songs. This land is also one of our most valuable natural resources. Because it is so valuable, and because it is limited both in quantity and in quality, we have learned how to use it well, to take care of it. We call this effort conservation. And all of us accept the fact that it is in our own best interest to plant trees to prevent soil erosion, to grow the kind of crops which will restore rather than exhaust the soil, and to reclaim through irrigation land that once was barren. But although we have for more than a generation accepted the importance of land conservation, it is only recently that we have set in motion dynamic, full-scale conservation of water, another great basic natural resource. It might seem reasonable to ask, as many people are in fact asking, how come all of a sudden there's a lack of usable water? Well, in the first place, there are really three answers rather than one. People, prosperity, and products. And in the second place, it isn't all of a sudden. This lack of usable water has finally caught up with us, but it's been developing for more than 50 years. Back at the turn of the century, the pace of life was leisurely, and fresh water supplies were plentiful. Nobody had to worry about simple things like water or sewage disposal. In those days, a town could take all the water it wanted from the nearest river, use it for the limited needs of the people, and then return it to the same river downstream in the form of raw sewage. They could get away with it then, because nature herself was able to restore the water to its original condition with the assistance of helpful bacteria. These special kinds of single-celled animals digest many forms of sewage by breaking it down into simpler compounds and basic elements. 50 years ago, when our streams flowed through sparsely populated areas, a river could meander peacefully downstream, giving the bacterial action time to do a thorough job. Result? Clean water in the stream again, ready for the next community to repeat the very same process. Now, if the laws of nature worked so well in 1900, why don't they work today? The answer is, they do. Nature hasn't changed, but we have. To begin with, we have a great many more towns and cities than we had in 1900, and 3 times as many people as we had then. So our answer number 1 is people. 3 times as many people. In addition, each individual today is using a great deal more water than each person did back in 1900. The reason is that we have raised our standard of living to unprecedented new heights. We have given up the simple life for higher standards of prosperity. Answer number 2, then, is prosperity. Instead of the 1900 average of 5 gallons of water used in the home per person per day, it is now estimated that we use an average of 50 gallons of water per person per day, and 150 gallons if we include both domestic use and municipal services. And from 1,500 to 2,000 gallons per person per day to supply us with the products of agriculture and industry. Which brings us to answer number 3. products. Few people realize the amount of water required for all the products of this highly complex society. It takes 300 gallons of water to grow the grain for a single loaf of bread. 4,000 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of beef. And 100,000 gallons of water to manufacture just one automobile. In fact, at our present rate of usage, by the year 1980, this nation's demand for clean water will be greater than the available supply, unless we reclaim and reuse water in order to meet the additional demand. During the last 20 years, we have created 6 times as much pollution for each individual in the nation. Raw sewage, industrial wastes, drainage from farmlands, all the side effects of more people, more prosperity, and more products. As a result, today more than 80% of the water used by our people is pumped out of lakes and rivers that also carry sewage from other people who have previously used the water. This water has to be treated before it can be used. There are many names for this type of water: reused water, reclaimed water, conserved water, renovated water. They all mean the same thing. The important point is that if we are willing to meet the challenge of the problem, increased use of renovated water could provide an additional source of supply, as well as the solution to our basic problem of conserving our present resources. We have made a start in this direction, but at the present time, unfortunately, only 33% of our people are completely treating their wastewater to make it easier to reclaim for reuse. Another 23% of our population are still being served only by primary and other limited sewage treatment plants. And this type of one-stage treatment may not be adequate. To understand why this is so, let us see exactly what happens in a primary sewage treatment plant. Raw sewage first passes through a screen, which removes large undissolved objects. The water then moves through a grit chamber, which permits the sand and silt to drift to the bottom. In a second tank, which is much larger, most of the remaining particles of matter in the sewage are allowed to settle to the bottom over a period of time. The settled solids are digested in a closed, heated tank, after which the residues are dried for ultimate disposal. The clarified water which remains is then drained off, and chlorine may then be passed through it to kill the harmful bacteria. Then, the chlorinated water is discharged into a stream or lake. Primary, or one-step treatment of sewage is of course superior to no treatment at all. In fact, primary sewage treatment may have been altogether adequate 25 years ago. Today, although it is an important first step, it certainly is not a complete solution, for it only removes a small portion of the objectionable waste material. The water which is discharged from this type of plant still contains many kinds of impurities. In order to restore such water to greater purity, we must now learn a lesson from nature. The time has come to imitate her centuries-old method of purifying water and restoring it to its natural state. And we can do this by building or adding the more advanced secondary treatment plants which incorporate the use of bacterial action. Here's how they work. This particular method is called the trickling filter. The water which leaves the primary treatment stage trickles down through a large bed of crushed rock 3 to 8 feet deep and up to 200 feet in diameter. Growing among the rocks are complex colonies of helpful bacteria and microscopic animals which break down the sewage into basic elements as the water trickles by. Another system, even more efficient, is called activated sludge. The sewage is digested by exposure to millions of tiny organisms in a tank. Air is bubbled through the mixture to provide the necessary oxygen. After the bacterial action is completed, the organisms are removed in a separate step. When the clarified water leaves either the activated sludge or the trickling filter system, It can be chlorinated and returned to the stream or lake from which it originally came. Within a very short time, it is as pure as it would have been back in 1900 if it had traveled many miles down an open stream. The reason is obvious. These types of secondary sewage treatment are simply compact, efficient, modern adaptations of nature's own methods of purifying sewage and restoring water to better quality. Furthermore, some communities with secondary treatment plants supply the reclaimed water to local industry for use in manufacturing processes. In other small communities near rural areas, the water from secondary treatment plants is supplied to farmers for irrigation, thus achieving the multiple objectives of using renovated water to reclaim arid areas and to preserve our natural resource of productive land. Another enterprising community filters its reclaimed water down through a bed of sand and gravel. This water then resurfaces to form lakes, which are used for community recreation activities such as boating, fishing, and swimming. Unfortunately, this type of water reclamation is the exception rather than the rule. Only 33% of our population is now served by secondary sewage treatment plants. Another 23% is still served only by primary or other partially adequate sewage treatment. And unbelievable though it may seem, 8% of the population in this country, 15 million people, are still discharging untreated raw sewage from sewer systems into our rivers and streams, a practice which could affect the health, safety, and rights of their neighbors. Even more incredible, about 36%, or 68 million people, more than 1/3 of our population, do not even have sewers and depend instead upon such inadequate methods of sewage disposal as septic tanks and cesspools, which may contribute to the pollution of a community's groundwater supply. Adequate, efficient, secondary sewage treatment plants can be designed for large cities, small towns, and medium-sized communities. Naturally, the larger the community, the larger the total cost. However, the per capita cost for larger treatment plants is usually not as much as it is for smaller plants. Remember, the longer you wait, the more expensive it will be. And governmental funds are available to help you do the job now. But progress cannot really be measured in dollars and cents. In the final analysis, any community of any size can make the decision to have good sewage treatment or poor sewage treatment. The decision does not depend upon the size of the community, but upon the will of the community, the determination of citizens, individually and collectively, to demand that the problem we have ourselves created be solved now by the solutions which are readily available now. To take an unmistakable stand supporting conservation of our water resources through control of pollution. To vote in favor of adequate, modern sewage treatment. Fortunately, people all over America today are taking stock of their community water and waste treatment problems and are beginning to do something about them. Those forefathers who preceded us passed along a magnificent heritage of dynamic industrial development, a higher standard of living, and abundant natural resources. What kind of legacy does this generation of Americans intend to leave to our own children and to the generations which will follow? The decision is up to every one of us, each in his own community. The decision for clean water cannot wait. The problem is acute. The solution is in our hands, and the time is now to take your stand for clean water. It's your decision.